Do you think, John, that the preponderance of the word narrative is negative in that it feeds into the notion of a person or a group having my truth or our truth? This is Kevin Pete asking this question. Is this usage a legacy of postmodernism? It seems to me it's a retreat from the straightforward notion of truth.
Yep. I hate that word. The way it's
You don't like
evolved. Narrative, because it can be used to mean the way I feel, the way I choose to frame my story is an alternate version of what the rest of you think of as empirical truth, and you have to respect it because I'm brown. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. Even say 20 years ago, the word narrative in that sense was pejorative. There was Landmark uses it. You go to Landmark in order to figure out what to do with your life because you're feeling kind of lost. Landmark, at least 20 years ago, was using that, oh no, you're being held back by a narrative. No, folks, I did not do Landmark, but back then many people thought that I should. And so I went to a couple of foundational meetings. No, you're being held back by a narrative. And what they meant by that was something that does not correspond with reality. But now, of course, I hate to say it, it's the CRT thing. The idea is that the racial narrative coming from an individual represents that person. You know, Hassan Minhaj, the South Asian comedian who's been caught telling stories about racist things that happened to him that didn't actually happen to him. And he defends himself by saying that he's using these things in these routines because he's representing people of his ethnicity and their experience. That's the narrative thing. And I'm not with it. I don't like it. What happened to me is a truth. No, what happened to you is based on facts that the rest of us should be able to assess. So no, I don't like this new use of narrative.
I can sympathize with, agree with your objections to the misuse in that way, the way that you described of the concept, but I want to hold on to it anyway. I have this little thing that I do in some of my writing about race, where I talk about the bias narrative and the development narrative. And I'm contrasting two different accounts that people are inclined to give. Folk wisdom, ways of representing history. The bias narrative being, you know, white supremacy has done us wrong. Structural racism needs to get its knee off of our black necks. Our ancestors were dispossessed and, you know, et cetera. And all the woes, prisons overflowing, broken families, low test scores, violent crime, blah, blah. Everything is accounted for by this historical account. And so I use the word narrative to refer to this cluster of tales that people tell each other about what's going on in the world. And I contrast that with another narrative and a counter narrative, development narrative, which I mean, where the focus is on, okay, there may be
kind of Thomas Sowell, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You're going to develop your capacities to produce, and you're going to be more valued when you do. And that requires investment in skills, and it requires acquiring discipline, and it requires raising up our children. It requires developing the potential, the human potential. And, you know, they're not mutually exclusive, but these are different narratives. Okay. So I want to hold on to this idea that you can identify, contrast, and argue about the stories we tell our children about how the world came to be what it is. What about America? What about the narratives that we tell about the country? And of course, warts and all, the country. But is it a rapacious bandit society of plundering racists, as the Ta-Nehisi Coates of the world would have it? Or is it a city on a hill, as the Reaganites would have it? Okay, those are contrasting narratives. Maybe neither one will suit you. But the concept, it seems to me, is useful. That's why.
All right. This brings us back to the Jews, as one says. I get you on that.
That's a narrative for you.
Yeah. And notice that Jewish people talk about the suffering, all these terrible things that were done to us and still are. But the idea is not, we suffered, and therefore you should understand why we are down. The idea is we suffered, and we triumphed, and they're proud of it. And that is part of why people are jealous of them. And if there is what I think of as genuine anti Semitism, part of it is jealousy. Yeah, all right. A narrative can be used well. So, for example, how do you tell Black history? And the fashionable way of telling Black history is here are the obstacles, and therefore you have to understand that's why more of us are poor than you might expect. That's really the story. Now, detractors, of course, nobody would say it that way, but that is the implication of the idea. To talk too much about Black victory is considered Pollyanna-ish and tacky and even disturbing among many, because once you talk too much about the successes, you're not talking about people banging their fists against the wall of structural racism and falling away, leaving a track of blood along the wall. That's the story that we're supposed to tell. So I think a Black history narrative that was about how we had triumphed would be much more useful, not Pollyanna-ish, especially today when so many of us have triumphed. Sure. No, that is a positive usage of narrative, but I worry about the way it's used among a certain kind of person who is not
Which
useful.
would be in the same area that he's gesturing at when he says postmodern and when he talks about
Yes.
truth is relative.
Yeah.
The idea that anybody can spin a narrative, and no matter who they are and what evidence they might cite to support their account, they should be taken seriously because it's their account after all.